The sort of concept of mansplaining from the perspective of an autistic man is really quite difficult. I'm not trying, obviously, to mansplain, but it's really, really difficult to not end up doing that accidentally.
You are listening to She Has No Limits, the podcast.
Once you're shown, you can't unsee. Time is short, you best believe in yourself. You're a formidable force, diving lessons in the deep end.
She Has No Limits is a movement and community for professional women to come together, be inspired and learn how to design the limitless careers that we deserve.
Ben Grubert is co-founder and CEO of Inevitable, a specialist artificial intelligence innovation firm that makes boundary-pushing technology solutions for businesses who are only just beginning to learn what is possible. Ben is also a high-functioning ADHD autistic bloke, and after breaking his back a few years ago, he discovered that, in his own words, he'd been disabled all his life. He redesigned his career, surrounded himself with a wholly neurodiverse team who have recently been awarded Tech Startup of the Year. Ben, we are incredibly pleased and proud to have you here today. A huge warm welcome to you. We are incredibly excited that we have you here. Hi. Where shall we start? Would you like to give us a potted history of you, your life and your career so far?
Okay. So, my life, my career, my history so far. It's a potted history will have to be the case. It's a long and winding tale. My more recent history starts when I was in quite a high-powered position in the job that I was doing, and the simplest way to put it would be that I discovered that I had a broken back. And I tell people that I broke my back, but that's actually not true. I actually discovered that I had a broken back and been walking around with one for 4 years. The funny part about that was, if it wasn't for the neurodiversity that I was born with, I have autism and ADHD, I wouldn't have been able to block out the pain signals, so it probably would have ended up going to hospital a lot earlier. So, my life was quite significantly disrupted at that point. I had to reevaluate a lot of things, but I also discovered that, there was portions to my makeup that should have been or would have been protected characteristics from day one. I just didn't know it. The funny part is I had to break my back to find out I was born disabled, which is, it's a peculiar sort of, yeah, you see where, yeah.
Absolutely. What a journey. I get that.
So, banded together with a couple of people who are like-minded, and we are now, last week, won an award for Tech Startup of the Year. And
congratulations.
That one's still sinking in. But the reason why we're so good at what we do is because we are fundamentally different. And instead of spending, because we're all on the spectrum, we all have protected characteristics. And instead of us spending all of our time fighting against the brass, we just do things the way we want to do it and the way we feel that we can do it. And instead we embrace the differences between us. From our perspective, I'm always on the lookout for thought processes, people who think as different to the way I think as physically possible, because that is how you build a team of people who can make very well-rounded decisions very quickly and very efficiently. And that's our strength. And it's how we've got to this point. It was only more recently when I was having a conversation with someone who is an avid feminist friend of mine. And they said, well, and I was talking about concepts of intersectionality, and I was talking about how the sort of, the different groups of people who are the downtrodden masses, as it were, I have no idea by the way, if any of the things I say are not politically correct, please just correct me. Yes, please.
No, we won't. There's no judgment here, Ben. Crack on.
Oh, well, okay. I guess I'll look it up later and give myself the heart attack. It's fine. I'll just find out through Twitter. But I was talking about how the concepts of intersectionality come across in business, and how we're now at a stage when, okay, we are having to reinforce the laws that we've created previously to reinforce the equality, but there's a social equity which is still missing. And they said, well, the topic came on to feminism because I was talking about recruitment, sort of, the 20-year-old sort of those unspoken questions that get asked in the recruitment process for women of a certain age. Are you in the family way? Questions don't get asked and lead to prejudice. And I said, well, this isn't my topic to discuss because I'm not a feminist. And they said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, how could I be a feminist? And they said, well, you believe in equality, right? And I said, well, yeah, of course. Well, that makes you a feminist.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
amen, brother.
Yeah. And it does feel a little bit ridiculous that we're still sort of fighting for a social equality even now. But I do have to say that, I've had some interesting experiences where people have said to me that, well, you can't be a feminist if you have a penis. I say this one thing to you. If I can't be a feminist because I have a penis, that statement is bollocks.
Very good. Very good. Can I ask you, when your friend said, well, of course you're a feminist, what was your gut response? How did that make you feel?
Well, I did what the natural autistic person does, and I asked them to define feminism, because life is a series of programmable instructions to people like me. And they did. We looked it up on Wikipedia together. I understood viscerally what feminism was, of course. But the statement that equality is a vector, it's not a statement where it's not an easy thing to understand. You can't just rattle off a couple of messages, and if you say these things, you've done this your sort of social responsibility. And when we went through that, I realized that this was something I had been fighting for a long, long time. I just hadn't really connected that to it conceptually, because of course, I would say that it shouldn't really be a radical thing for every person on the planet to be treated equally. That really doesn't strike me as a radical statement. And the only radical message that I guess I have is from my personal belief, as it were, is I don't personally believe that this mentality that we have, we sort of go, well, let's all gang up together in order to help this one group and then send the ladder down afterwards. It makes sense. It's a simple thing to understand. But in reality, there is always a gap to bring up. That doesn't subscribe to intersectionality at all. It sort of goes, well, it's almost like a marketing campaign. Let's just focus on this one characteristic, and then let's focus on this one characteristic. But as far as I'm concerned, if every single person who is in the quote, the people who are left behind with all of these properties, instead of focusing on the differences between them and going, well, no, it's us first, it's us next. Oh no, it's you next, and trying to create a pecking order between them. If they all just went, hang on a minute, counted some heads and went, we're actually, we're close to 99% of the population here.
Yeah.
Bandy together. That sounds like the logical way to resolve this, right?
Yeah, it reminds me of that. Have you seen those images? It's very difficult to describe an image on a podcast, I'm finding. You've got a circle in the middle with privilege in. So it's typically white, male, middle class. And then the further out you get, the more intersectionality and diversity you get. So, that slice of the pie is the female slice, and that's the BAME slice, and that's the neurodiversity slice. But like you say, if you add up all of those outer parts, it more than outweighs the small privileged middle core.
Absolutely. And so, I don't believe in this kind of, arguing whose cause we should all lend our names to next, because that will never end. I understand the reason why there's kickback. As far as I see it, the concept of equality or achieving equality is not a static effect. It's not if you do this and this and this, you've done your social responsibility. It's a vector. It's a thrust. And that is an uncomfortable thing. There's a lot of, and it also explains why people get left behind, because there's constant changing terminology and there's constant changing actions that people know they should be doing. That can leave people behind that kind of should be part of it. I would argue, just going back to this concept of allyship, to answer your question before, where did my mind go when someone said, oh, well, you're a feminist? It seemed so obvious that the key to true equity is not in fighting a fight against the other sex, as if this whole topic is some form of battleground, because you don't win wars, especially if you're not allowed to kill the other side, I guess, which means that by definition, you can only win, as it were, by recruiting. So allyship is clearly the solution. If everyone who identified as male also identified as a feminist, then isn't that the point?
Well, to you and to us it is, but we know from the figures of our audience, our community, people that come to our She Has No Limits events, we've still got a long way to go before men feel comfortable being allies, calling themselves allies, commenting on posts, engaging in conversations about equality, feminism, call it what you will.
I would say this statement then. In sort of toxic male culture, you don't show weakness, everything is strength-based. But counterintuitively, the greatest way to show strength is by revealing weakness. And by that very sort of thought process, even the people who logically, and I know that logic doesn't always prevail, but even the people who subscribe to this sort of toxic masculinity should be all into feminism by that simple definition. Unfortunately, logic doesn't always win out, I guess. But, there are these two battlegrounds, and my life in the last couple of years living in the startup world has shown just how far we have to go. We can change laws, we can enforce laws, but leveling that playing field from a social perspective is going to take generations, unfortunately.
Ben, can I ask you a question? As we started this podcast, you said we are all different in our team. And you actually recruit for different. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit more with you. Tell us a bit more.
Okay. So the evidence shows that the companies with the greatest amount of diversity within a decision-making team also have the highest profit margins. However, the reverse isn't true. Simply having lots of money doesn't necessarily make you diverse. This suggests that there is a direct connection between the ability to make strong, impactful decisions and the amount of diversity in the decision-making process. Now, the team that we've pulled together kind of have diversity of the mind baked in already, and we sort of started off with that premise. So it was easy for us to sort of go, okay, we're a bunch of nerds. Let's take a look at how we currently think and say, okay, who can we bring in to challenge and come at it from a totally different perspective. And by picking someone who comes at the problem from as far a perspective different to what we have as possible, we're able to, in a small as team as possible, make as strong a decision as possible. So that is one of the key characteristics when we're looking for recruitment, is to try and find people from as far flung different walks of life across all spectrums of diversity. And it's worked. We've just been crowned Startup of the Year. So, we're obviously doing something right. Maybe it's just the AI part, I guess. But
so one of the questions I've got, Ben, is, human behavior is that we tend to like being in the company of people like us. And yet you are actively bringing together people who are different in mind. Is there? And if there is, how do you deal with conflict?
Good question. So take my co-founder and I. We're just the sort of starting points of the company, but we both think in exact opposite ways, as in I can prove on a whiteboard, maths and everything, how we think differently. I think about a problem from the absolute top downwards because of the characteristics that I have, and my co-founder thinks completely bottom upwards. which basically means that if we come to the point, we will disagree about 30% of the time on any one point. If we can somehow meet in the middle, that's when we know that at least that characteristic, we've talked about it and we have managed to map the problem from both the perspectives in one go. So we do disagree and we embrace that. We are different and we completely embrace that. If we were the same and we agreed, there would be no requirement for there to be two of us.
Group think. I wanted you, Ben, to explain to our lovely listeners why you're here today. I know why you're here today, but where did you come to get involved? Tell us about your She Has No Limits journey.
Well, the same friend of mine who explained to me that I was a feminist decided to prove the point by nominating me for one of the awards that you guys have. And the award was the Hero Award, which I remember after I so valiantly lost the award, we got into contact. I remember speaking to yourselves. We obviously hit it off because I let down my guard enough to be able to make a suggestion, which was to change the name of the award to either Ally Award, which is a bit, it does the job, or my favourite, which is I Have a Dick, but I'm Not a Dick Award.
Oh, dear. What do you reckon, Catherine? We've just started the planning cycle for the next conference and awards, Ben, so we'll let you know.
There were some thoughts that I wanted to sort of bring about, and this is to do with, it's a statement as to how far we have come and how far we still have to go. Most of my fight, as it were, is across as many categories of equality as physically possible. But I tend to get drawn into issues to do with neurodiversity and disability. I'm glad that people don't phone me on certain matters when there are other people who are more qualified to deal with them. But I see every day in the business world, judgment calls and decisions hugely biased in ways that limit the potential of people who are intrinsically very good at what they do. And all they're really missing is for people to start believing in them. You don't start a company if you don't believe in yourself. Or, okay, maybe in a way everybody does, because I suspect that most company founders have imposter syndrome way up until the IPO. The problem is there are areas of equality that just can't be covered in law. You can't take someone to employment tribunal for not funding your company or not taking out a contract with you. And this is a characteristic that is very, very difficult to enforce. How do you? And the only real way to solve that problem as well is allyship. I've heard some horrendous stories of female founders. People have tried to take advantage of them for the purposes of funding, as in, offering funding to people, to the founder, and asking leading questions if they're likely to just about to go start a family, and then asking more leading questions about whether or not they have a boyfriend. These are old stories, but they're recurring stories that are still happening. And in reality, we'll know that we've managed to achieve a sort of equality when the FTSE 100 boardrooms are full of an equal distribution of all demographics. I believe at present there are more guys called John than there are women in FTSE 100 companies in the boardrooms. And that just tells you everything you need to know. And let alone people with disability or people from other protected characteristics. I think that tells us how far we have to go, because that's not a battle that can be won in the law court. That's a battle that has to be won in the mind. And, one, in a situation when somebody's investing in a company, that's when they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're saying, I believe that this company will succeed, and I believe that this person will succeed in doing what they're doing, and other people will take out contracts with them. That's where all of this comes to a head. In my mind, it's not so much it's the only battleground, it's that it's one of the hardest ones to win. So it shows us, it gives us those indications. And from my perspective as an autistic founder, I'm openly autistic. I describe myself as being riddled with autism, actually riddled with neurodiversity, in fact. But because I'm I'm pretty open about these things. You know, it makes life difficult. Now, the good news is, because I'm open about that, the types of people who I want to work with come in droves. And the people who would otherwise sort of get halfway down a ladder of working together and then start discriminating against us, they tend to stay away, which is good.
Ben, just talking about those people that... So I have a generous belief that those people who start to discriminate, it's all about their own fear, and it's their own fear of unknown, and it's not familiar, and they don't know how to respond. So what's your view, being an autistic man, a neurodiverse man, how can those people who are riddled with their own fear, and as a result their behaviours are displayed in unacceptable ways, how can we help that group of people?
So in my experience, when it comes to discrimination, and this isn't just my own personal discrimination, this is discrimination of friends, loved ones. I get pulled into a lot of this. The root cause tends to come from a position of ignorance and incompetence, not generally first from willful. Now, obviously, there is willful discrimination going on left, right, and centre. But the statistically, the chance, the probability, is much, much higher that it is simply a case of incompetence or ignorance. Somebody doesn't know that the thing they're doing has this output. And this is particularly difficult when it comes to hidden disabilities. The next problem that happens, so obviously there's an education component there, but there's also a component that where the people with these conditions have to, at some point in this process, they have to be able to speak up and say, I have this. Regardless of what stage it happens, it doesn't have to be first. But the second part of this process is partly this kind of toxic masculinity, never back down, never say sorry, part of the process. That happens from an institution perspective as well. Because the second one person does something along these lines, there is a tendency to close ranks. I have got the repeated message that it's better not to engage than admit that you've done something wrong. If you admit that you've done something wrong, then you open yourself up to public debate, or possibly even being taken to court. So admitting that you're wrong, me apologizing in advance for if I interrupt you guys accidentally, I don't mean it. That's me knowing that given a long enough length of time, I'm going to interrupt someone. And knowing me, it could be something they know more about than I do. But a lot of people aren't comfortable enough in this topic with themselves to ever admit that they're wrong. And they feel like the way to win is just to double down. And that is very, very old school, isn't it? It's, and I'm hoping that is something that gets washed out as we sort of progress as a society. But there has to be a mechanism to be able to record the social injustices as well. One instance, there's a limited ability to record precedents in instances of Equalities Act violations. So if somebody gets discriminated against, let's say that they're disabled, I'm just going to go into my domain for a minute here. If they get discriminated against, that gets treated as a complaint, not as within the organization. If they're a service user, that gets treated as a complaint, automatically biasing as let's just try and close this complaint down. Fundamentally, that escalates to it needing to be seen by, in this case, it'd be a magistrate. But that means in order for them to enforce their rights, they need to be able to financially back their statement, which logically means that in order to have enforceable rights, you need to be rich. And then if they win, there's no method of recording that as a precedent, so that there's a faster method of decision making. So there are some problems. And are you guys aware of this 6 out of 10 last year?
Nope.
6 out of 10 people who died in the UK in 2020 of COVID were disabled.
Gosh.
And, I do statistics. That's too high. And this was a concept that was drilled into. And they found that there was a period where if you had a learning disability and you were admitted to hospital last year, you were automatically slapped with a do not resuscitate. Now,
oh my gosh.
This is the concept of intersectionality coming in, because if there was any other group of people that were able to defend themselves that had that kind of automatic do not resuscitate placed onto them without their will, without their ability to defend themselves. They had no advocates going in with them. There's no way that people wouldn't know about that. So the people who are so busy putting out fires in their own life or not capable of fighting for themselves, I'm not saying that this is a case of, oh, let's look after them first, because I don't believe in that. But there's a lot of ground to make up in the protection of the people's rights who are forced to stay silent.
Ben, holding that thought, we're going to wrap up the podcast. We could spend hours learning from you. I'm absolutely mesmerised. Thank you. And I'm still trying to recover myself from that information. Thank you for using this podcast to bring that to light or to emphasise it. What would you like our listeners to hear, to take away, to remember as a result of this incredibly important conversation today?
If you identify as male and you believe in equality, that makes you a feminist. That means that your fight is aligned to the fight of everybody else. If you don't identify as male and you are a feminist, allyship is, in my humble opinion, the way to bring about equality, not just for one mass, but for every mass individually. Because that's the difference between iteration and innovation. It's revolution. It's everyone standing up and going, hang on, there is a commonality between us. We all are being left behind. And not being a feminist because you have a penis must just be bollocks.
One last thing. Your female friend who decided to prove a point by entering you to win our Hero Award. What's her name, please? We must celebrate her.
Her name is, and she is, the wonderful Rachel Morgan Trimmer.
Rachel Morgan Trimmer, we salute you.
We do indeed.
And a point well proven. In order to win a logical debate with me, it does take months and an application process.
Absolutely. Ben Grubert, accidental mansplainer and ardent feminist, thank you very much for joining us today.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, wow, Amanda, that was some conversation with Ben, wasn't it, this afternoon?
Mind blowing.
An incredible, incredible individual. In fact, I was sitting there thinking, I don't think I'd understand half of what was going on in that office if I was there. And that's me being generous with the half. Maybe even 2% of it. Incredible brain.
His output, what he brings into the world in terms of what he's thinking, is prolific and powerful, I think.
Oh, yeah, beyond powerful. And as you so rightly put at the end of the conversation, I don't think he sees it or acknowledges what he has to say and the power behind it and the meaning behind it and the contribution that he has to make to some of the conversations that we are sadly having in the world today. So
I was really interested to hear his views on the toxic masculine culture of, sadly, so many workplaces still today. And, you know, him talking about the experiences he's had as a neurodiverse person, you know, leaders pulling rank, closing him down, shutting him down, enforcing the law. It's no wonder that he uses the language of war and a battleground, is it?
It's big thinking, isn't it? It makes you think. It's so sad, and it's just that privilege, isn't it? And the privilege of the few who are dominating the many, and how he defined the many, just to lead on with that thinking, was quite incredible, really. We're not discrete groups. We're all different. And so we should be wrapping our arms around absolutely everybody. So, yeah, it was heartfelt, I think. I think that's where I went to in my listening was, gosh, how tough. How tough for so many people. You know, Ben's got his journey, but all the other people that have also on the experience, who are experiencing the behaviours of others, and those others are also a minority.
And I'm really pleased he used this conversation to shine a light on, well, several things, but One of them was the gender bias in investment and startup funding, which is a big, big challenge that affects the entire economy, right?
Yeah.
And then that stat about COVID, my God, 6 out of 10.
Yeah, and for those people that don't have a voice, and they don't have a voice because of the learning disability, it's criminal. As he was talking, it just leaves you speechless, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you can't believe that that is what is going on in our world today. The other point that energised me rather than shocked me was that I just love the fact that he celebrates difference. I mean, I'm really very curious about that in terms of actively looking for people that are different, bringing people together, because that, as you and I know, is not an easy task. And I suspect that the conflict that goes on there is because of the difference. And then to have that skill set to actually get an outcome at the end of it is just amazing. So I'd love to explore that more with him at a future conversation together, maybe on another podcast.
Yeah, what a brilliant entrepreneur. A lot more to come from Ben Grubert over the years.
Absolutely.
That's it for this episode. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed. Please send us your feedback. And if you'd like to have a sneaky peek as to who's coming up, then go to shehasnolimits.com and check out our podcast page.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care. All the best.